So the advantage of inclusive wealth, as I've indicated, is that it provides a coherent and cohesive view, sort of unified coherent framework to talk about sustainable development. It is forward-looking. I mean, the wealth component, it's really focused on assets and asset value. Asset values, at least in theory, are capturing the future flow of benefits that those assets create. So that's why this is a potentially useful approach for looking at sustainable development. It is an extension in a practical sense from what's in most economic textbooks, in the sense that it focuses on really being inclusive wealth. In other words, let's try to incorporate all forms of assets, including natural capital. So not just focused on manufactured capital or manufactured capital and human capital, but let's incorporate natural capital as well. What about natural capital? So by natural capital, I'm going to include land resources, natural resources, so in the way of mineral or energy, timber, fish stocks, so forth, environmental quality, but also ecosystem processes that, you know, if we change an ecosystem structure or function, that then led to changes in these more proximate forms of natural capital, like environmental quality. So fundamentally, we have to keep track of kind of the infrastructure of ecosystems, just as we would keep track of the infrastructure of manufactured capital on the human side. Okay, unfortunately, natural capital, we can certainly track certain aspects of natural capital. So mineral resources, energy resources, timber, some forms of environmental quality, so greenhouse gas concentrations. But even here, of course, what we want is not the flow of minerals and energy. We really want how is the stock of these resources changing. So I don't want to know about current oil production as much as I want to know about reserves of oil. And there's great uncertainty about reserves, even for things like oil, which are heavily studied. Fish stocks, you know, we have some stock assessments. There are questions about, you know, how accurate and so forth. But so we can measure some stocks with uncertainty, but we can measure some stocks of natural capital. Ecological processes, some types of environmental quality, the resilience of systems. So if we are changing systems in perhaps subtle ways that might lead to, in the future, fundamental shifts in how those ecosystems function, we would try to measure that and capture that. I think that's something right now that we are woefully inadequate to be able to do. So there's a lack of systematic data collection. There's also, frankly, a lack of, and kind of Ian alluded to it very early on when he said, you know, what's our natural science base of understanding? Is it up to the task? And for some of these things, it's clearly not up to the task at the moment. Okay, so going on, human capital. So we're talking about education, experience. You know, we can at least measure how many hours you spent in the classroom. Whether that actually measures how much you know is a harder thing, and experience is also hard to measure. Health capital actually turns out to be, if you've read the Arrow article or looked at that, the 2010 version, their health capital measures are hugely important and really drive, they're much more quantitatively important than other forms of capital. So the changes that they look at in terms of inclusive wealth are really driven by health capital considerations. How should we treat social capital or institutions? There are some measures of good governance. Can we predict in the future how much good governance there will be? I think the answer to there is pretty fundamentally no. I mean, who predicted the Arab Spring prior to the beginning of this year? How do we think about trust relationships among people, and so on? So there's a lot in social capital I think is very difficult to measure. Okay, so in summary, there's many forms of capital, some of which can be measured, some of which can be measured but maybe only imprecisely, and some is going to be very difficult to get any kind of consistent data to measure them at all.